Before Ufotable took over in 2011 with Fate Zero, the studio who produced Konosuba were helming the Fate franchise. Of course, I am talking about Studio Dean, but just 1 year before Fate Zero would hit the market and breathe new life into the franchise, possibly kickstarting the franchise into a $1 billion cash cow, Studio Dean would release one of the most confusing, half-hearted, rushed, and most important of all, forgotten Fate movie. My name is SeaTactics for the win, otherwise known as Ben, and of course we are here to talk about Studio Dean's Fate Stay Night movie, Unlimited Blade Works. Starting off, we have to set the stage. Back in 2004, the Fate Stay Night visual novel hit the market and propelled Type Moon in a way they'd never experienced before. And with that big success, what better way to capitalize than to release an anime? So, in 2006, Studio Dean and director Yuji Yamaguchi, known for working on classic 90s series like Outlaw Star and Cowboy Bebop, he helmed the first ever Fate anime series, Fate Stay Night 2006. This anime focused on the Fate route, one of the 3 routes in the visual novel, and the first route, which follows primarily Shiro and Saber, that explores a romance between the two. At the time, the anime was generally well received, as back then this was the only Fate anime, and besides issues like pacing and generally some pretty questionable story choices like removing Shiro's inner dialogue, which made him look completely stupid, well, like I said, it was generally well received. So to follow up the success of the 2006 anime, Studio Dean and Yuji Yamaguchi returned for a new project that would see the adaptation of the visual novel's second route, Unlimited Blade Works. This route is mostly about Shiro and Archer's ideals clashing, but it as well features a rather sweet romance between Shiro and Rin Tosaka. And after the 2006 anime, the film was off to the races. Scripts were sent in to be approved since 2008, and all of the Japanese cast and most of the English cast were able to reprise their roles successfully. From the start, the film was somewhat in trouble. Director Yuji Yamaguchi and screenplay writer Takuya Sato noted that the most difficult part of this film would be turning the whole route of UBW, a somewhat massive 20 to 30 hours of playtime, into an hour-and-a-half film. So they would then go back and ask to lengthen the film to its now hour and 45-minute runtime. And because of the change in presentation, some changes would have to be made to the story. So director Yamaguchi decided to almost strip out the entire prologue of the visual novel and most of the dialogue in the more day-to-day scenes. These were replaced in favor of hammering on the dialogue which the characters would speak during the action scenes. Though funnily enough, there is an alternate version of this film script where Takuya Sato actually focused on the dialogue during the scenes that don't have action, but sadly, they were never used. And this is one of the reasons I feel most people can agree that the best parts of this film is either the action scenes, or at least the climax of the film, which sees some pretty great writing that nails the feel of the original visual novel fairly well. The film would still go through changes yet, as Yamaguchi decided to add a red tint to the film as he expressed his desire to give this route a more adult feel to the team's work. This is one of the more noticeable aspects of the film, along with the character designs, which were handled in some cases by Takashi Takeuchi, the original character designer from the visual novels. And because the film went over budget, everything received more work and effort, which is very obvious when comparing the film to the 2006 prequel. Now that we've got all of that out of the way, let's get to my own subjective thoughts on the film. And there are many things here which I think the film does really well. I think the last act of this film and the way they handle the big battles is done really well. There are some minor changes which made me scratch my head. When Rin and Shiro mana transfer so that Shiro can use his reality marble, Rin transfers her command seals for Saber back to Shiro. This to me is not only filler but completely useless, because this has no bearing on anything that happens for the rest of the film. In every other version, Rin keeps her command spells, and that's that. In reality, what this does is it actually weakens Saber, as with Rin as her master, she is with full power, but with Shiro, she is not anywhere near that. This was a very minor oversight that could have been avoided if there were no changes to this small part of the film. Another issue I had with this film is Yamaguchi's somewhat abysmal camera angles. From Rin and Shiro's meeting in the darkened streets of Fuyuki City, where where, for some reason, this is the angle for way too long, Archer's impossible shooting angle as well, which somehow manages to land, and of course, whatever this is here in this Archer versus Shiro fight, these shots are rather poor and fail to frame the action of the scene properly, causing the viewer to awkwardly look to the sides of the screen. And as well, Yamaguchi's changes to the film's color palette, adding a red tint. This was an interesting choice back in 2010, but in 2019 it looks a little awkward and somewhat outdated. But the biggest issue with this film is its breakneck pacing, speeding through everything to get to the final act. It honestly feels like I'm watching UBW in clip form glued together, or even better, UBW on 4 times the speed. It's the film's biggest weakness, and it's something that they ultimately couldn't avoid anyways, unless they decided to go somewhat anime original, which I think they should have done. Adapting UBW into a single film is absolutely an impossible task. Something that even Ufotable knows, as they took 24 episodes to adapt it. And with Heaven's Feel, they are adapting that into 3 feature-length films, which are at least 2 hours long. For what it's worth, you can't really get invested in anyone else but Shiro and Archer, which is rather frustrating, as a major part of this route is Rin Tosaka. Yet in this film, she's pretty much forgotten about, and to make matters worse, her best moments in the VN are in this film, but as whatever this dolphin is. As for the music, Kenji Kawai returns to score the film, and the music is rather bland, at least to me. It's not nearly as good as his work on the 2006 anime, and falls flat for a majority of this film. The same can be said for some of the choices in the dub. Sakura and Saber are voiced by different people than they were in the 2006 versions and later the Ufotable versions, and they're both weak in comparison to either. Not counting Sakura, who didn't find a voice until Christina V took over duties for that character. Though while I do like Michelle Ruff and her version of Saber in Fate Apocrypha, I felt her version of this Saber in the UBW movie wasn't as good as Kate Higgins, which I feel is likely the most accurate version of Saber to this day. Other than that, the English dub cast is actually pretty good, and is generally the same pool of voice actors which voice the characters to this day. As for the positives of the film, there are actually many, but they happen in the last couple of acts. Because while the first couple acts are pretty slapdash at best, the dynamic between Shiro and Archer is done really well in this film, and even Gilgamesh as well gets some shine to his character, though not as much in the TV version. Shiro's fight with Archer is probably the most satisfying moment in the whole film, which is the climax of the film being the second best moment. Shiro's fight with Archer is probably the most satisfying moment in the film. Seeing Shiro confront himself after the reveal that he himself is Archer, and how he denies Archer and vows to never be like him. I mean, it's a great moment, and the fight itself is highly entertaining and a feast for the eyes. It really is. Studio Dean does some of their best work animating the last act of Unlimited Blade Works and giving a nice movie-like sheen to it. It feels premium, and I like that a lot. And later on, when Shiro fights Gilgamesh as well, it's not as good as Archer and Shiro, but still incredibly well-paced and built up, as well as Gilgamesh's English voice actor kicking it into high gear and really getting into his role, which I think for him, he nails that cocky attitude of Gilgamesh almost perfectly. But either way, this fight is really awesome, and when the Grail is destroyed and comes to reclaim the servants, Gilgamesh, with a chain from Ryder, tries to pull himself out of the Grail, displaying how overpowered Gilgamesh really is, that he can himself resist the power of the omnipotent Holy Grail. It's epic. In closing, this film is many things. It's poorly paced. It's got shoddy story execution. It also has some questionable casting choices for key characters in the dub. But it's not a bad film in the least. It's a solid rendition of the UBW route that gives you the most important parts and the best possible context that it could at the time be given to you. It's extremely rough around the edges, and in this day and age, I would actually never recommend anyone to go out and seek this film, unless you're a collector or you're just a huge Fate fan like myself. Ufotable's version is not only the complete story, but also beats it out in just about every way. And this is why this film is forgotten, or not even known about by some people to begin with. It's simply a poor man's UBW at the end of the day, because it's outdated beyond comparison and lacking to every other version. But I think there is a key takeaway from this film. Studio Dean, to me, should have never been in discussion to helm the Fate franchise in this way. The same goes for Yamaguchi, all respect to him. If anything, at this time, the better choices would have been Madhouse, because this anime is something back then I think they would have greatly enjoyed making and probably excelled at. So with that being said, put your thoughts and opinions down below on what you think about the forgotten Fate movie. If you find some of these videos interesting, click on them, subscribe, ring the bell, like the video, that's very important, and you can support me on Patreon on the $1 tier and above to get access to a bunch of stuff. I'll see you later, thanks for watching, bye bye.